At Dot & Company, we believe that all agencies deserve amazing account managers and that all of those account managers deserve to be supported, encouraged, and loved on. That's why we started CAM Community, a membership only for account managers. And inside, you'll gain access to the exact training we use to train our own client-facing account managers, but also access to all of our SOPs, processes, and live trainings on a variety of topics. If you're an account manager, this is the place you've been waiting for. Learn more at dotandcompany.co/CAM community.
But my goal is to alleviate the stress of doing things that the agency owner doesn't like to do in order to make business development more successful.
Welcome to the Happy Clients Podcast, brought to you by Dot & Company. Whether you're a virtual assistant, an agency owner, or a client-facing account manager, we all deal with clients. Lucky for you, client management is what we do best. Now, let's dig in, chat cam life, and have some fun along the way. Cheers to happy clients.
Welcome back to another episode of the Happy Clients Podcast. Today, I have invited Jody Sutter on to the podcast to tell us all about the things that she helps agencies with when it comes to sales, but wanted to introduce you and thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Jody.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I'm excited to dig into sales because I think this is such a huge bottleneck for a lot of agencies, especially the ones that we work with. Not only when it comes to building out sales teams, that's obviously what we want to get to, but it's how do we optimize the current sales process that you might be running? So why don't you kind of start by filling us in on who you are and how you help agencies?
Sure. So the way I describe myself is a career business development professional. So before starting my own business, I did business development for a range of either agencies or creative services firms that sold to agencies. I was either selling to agencies or selling for agencies. I've worked with smaller firms where I was out there on the front lines, doing the selling, creating the lists, in certain cases, doing the marketing. So I, especially early on in my career, I really got the sense of what it takes to sustain smart sales strategies. And then towards the end of my career, or before I started my business, I was working with bigger agencies, so large global teams, working on large global pitches that would go across months. So it was really around coordinating teams, and the way I used to describe it was creating the environment that was most conducive to win. I started my business about 10 years ago, around 2014, 2015. And I, through some starts and stops, I ended up deciding to focus on the owners of small agencies because, small agencies around, say, 5 to 55 people. Because what I find in these agencies is that they're often not at the point where they can hire a salesperson or a sales team. And so they've got to figure out how to do business development. Business development is still important, how to do it without that sales team. And we were talking about, right before you pressed record, about whether or not the owner should be involved, the owner, founder. And I actually, one of my core beliefs as a business owner is that, yes, the owner needs to be involved, especially when you are starting out, especially as you are developing your business development approach. It's really hard to have someone else figure out what that business development strategy is for you. So it's got to be based around the owner's strengths and the owner's vision for the company. So that's what I do now. I work with the owners of small marketing agencies who find themselves struggling when it comes to business development. Often they've reached an inflection point where they need a little more structure, a few more systems, and a bit more confidence, and sort of a roadmap for what they need to do. And I have a framework called the New Business Ecosystem that I work on with my agency clients. We develop a new business ecosystem, and like a natural ecosystem, the components that we put into that ecosystem are right for the agency, right for the environment, work well together. So ideally, it's an efficient system and one that the agency team really wants to embrace and work with.
That's so cool. So what is the goal of what should be the goal for the agency owner when it comes to business development? Should they be able to predict sales? Should they be able to offload sales to a salesperson once they have it developed? Like, what are some of the things that you're helping the agency owner get to?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it depends on the agency's goals. Two different types of agencies. If you are a boutique bespoke firm that has a very, specialized offering, and maybe you want to be a healthy, thriving agency, but you don't necessarily want to triple or quadruple in size. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's a difference between growing and thriving. Sometimes you'll find them both, but sometimes it's just simply thriving. In that case, it may be that the agency owner, it may make sense for the agency owner always to be involved in sales. If you have some serious growth goals, you want to double the size of your agency, then you need to figure out what the end goal is. How do we eventually transition? So what has to be in place first, though, that the agency owner has to make a commitment towards a positioning. That agency owner also has to make a commitment towards who their ideal client is and how they are messaging to that ideal client, so that as they bring more people on, they can telegraph what that is, and makes it much easier for a salesperson once they understand the positioning that they're selling. I think what I find the mistake is when an agency owner sort of sees hiring that salesperson as just solving all their problems, and they kind of hand things over to them and say, great, you do what I least like having to do. So that's sort of setting your salesperson up to fail. I want to help the agency owners set the salespeople up to succeed.
That's so important. And I relate to that because I was in the sales role for way too long.
Yeah.
And we recently
As
overhauled
an
our
agency
sales
owner.
process. Yeah, as an agency owner, I
Yeah.
was doing the sales for way too long, and it would just drain me. Like I
Mhm.
would not look forward to having calls on my calendar, and it just wasn't my zone of genius, although I had to do it for
Right.
so long until we got to the point where we could bring in a sales team and we could optimize the process. And it has been a game changer since we've optimized
Oh,
those
that's great.
processes and
Yeah.
removed me.
Yeah.
But I agree, it's stages, right? It's like agency owner first, then get momentum, get your positioning, get your offer right, build your processes, and go from there.
Well, I also think it's that when I start out with a client, I always start looking diagnostically at what the issues are, and I sort of divide them up into three areas. Are you struggling finding clients, filling your pipeline? Then I think it's often an issue of positioning and outbound messaging. Uh, Are you having trouble converting converting prospects into clients, closing deals? So that's around closing skills. Or is the whole system just totally chaotic and no one knows what they're doing, and everyone's overwhelmed and inefficient? Then that sounds like you're probably becoming a victim of your own success. And that's when we need to think about scaling and getting systems in place. So for you, if you have, and I know that you've got a lot of strengths, but it sounds like maybe like the screening calls or even the closing calls, as you said, they drained you. They weren't your ideal. There wasn't the ideal way to use your genius. So, but maybe a better way, if there was a gap around things like generating leads, if you hate the idea of doing outbound, if you hate the idea of having those types of qualifying calls, but I know that with this podcast, you seem like you automatically gravitate towards that sort of thought leadership type of content marketing. Well, then if I was working with you, I'd say, let's have you do that. Let's see if we can figure out another way, find another person within your agency to maybe do those closing calls. You have to be a little careful there because you need someone with good closing skills. But my goal is to alleviate the stress of doing things that the agency owner doesn't like to do in order to make business development more successful.
That's key to a thriving agency. Like you
Yeah.
said, if you want to have a thriving agency, you should be focused on what you do that makes you feel like
Right.
you're thriving.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
for a lot of agency owners, also the account management side is something that sucks their energy and doesn't allow them to even step into this business development sales role. So talk to me a little bit about agencies that you work with that maybe the agency owner is wanting to transition out of account management. What are they generally dealing with?
Transferring out of account management more into sales. Yeah. So
Mhm.
what I've found is that that's often the situation where the agency owner, first of all, is, in my experience, I'd be interested in knowing what you found, but that often, to me, as an agency owner whose background is in account management. So they started their agency because they had a few core relationships. They were really good at building relationships with clients and building a team to help deliver on what those clients needed. So the good news is that that's really transferable, I think, to sales relationship building. So that's great. I think one of the biggest challenges is convincing the agency owner that it's okay to let go. Because I think sometimes there's also a difference between what they intellectually want and what they emotionally need. So
Yep.
they're so used to managing the clients, and yet they know they want to be out there. The account management is draining. They want to be out there building sales, and yet they feel like everything revolves around them, which probably hasn't up to this point. So a big part of this is to make sure they feel comfortable about delegating those responsibilities.
That is a really great insight. So thinking about, okay, I totally agree. Most agency owners are really good at the account management.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not, but oftentimes it's the easy thing to do. You know, you've probably sold the client, you want to manage the client, you want to have that white knuckle grip on everything.
Yes. Yeah.
But as they're moving through growing and scaling their agency, they realize that they have to hire somebody to take over that role. But often what I'm seeing, especially nowadays, I hear this a lot, is that let's say the agency owner is doing the sales,
Yeah.
they close a client, maybe it's a friend of theirs, maybe it's a contact of theirs,
Yeah.
and they're good to go. And then they have to hand that over to their account team. And that change of relationship, moving the scope over from sales to account management often gets jumbled.
Yeah.
So any recommendations for agencies as they're making that transition?
Yeah. I think one of the things that a lot of agencies don't do as much as I'd like them to do is to transition the account people, the account team, or other members of the team into the sales process earlier. So this is also an area where agency owners sort of feel like, I'm the only one who can do this. I'm the only one who can talk to the clients, both in a sales situation and in an account management situation, which means that especially as you grow your agency, you're never growing that B team, that sort of farm team. So I think there's opportunities. I think mentorship is really missing a lot of times. So, and it sounds so simple, but have people participating in these sales calls, even an early exploratory call. Introduce, like, I have my team member here and she's going to be following up with you, or however you want to position them, but just have them involved, have them listening to you. I mean, I don't know, I guess that's how I was trained going way, way back. I was really lucky to have a lot of fantastic mentors. And one of the things that my best mentors always did was just pull me along, taking you to a meeting. Let's like get you in a phone call. So I learned not just by doing the support work for them, but by being involved and watching how they operated. I think that's a big way. Just identify who on your team has the promise to take over this role, and just start to let them tag along with you. It's as simple as that.
I agree.
That's
I
right.
think I always encourage agency owners to either bring the account manager along or at least speak to what it's going to be like on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is it going to be like when Sarah takes over that account and she's going to be, you know, building that relationship with you and making sure that all this is executed? What is that going to like paint the picture for the client so they know what's coming on the other side of that signed agreement?
I think that's a really great point. I think what you're saying is not just about getting the account person ready and primed, but it's also priming the client to say, hey, I am not going to be managing your account. I've got a fabulous team and here's who they are. Yeah, I think that's a really great point.
Yeah. And I think that's where agency owners get stuck in the day-to-day, is because they sell them, they build that relationship, then they feel like they still need to be around.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
that's good or bad, you know, they feel like they need to. And I always encourage agency owners to pass the torch. You have a team that you trust, pass the torch and allow them to do their job, which is super, super impactful. So
I'd like to have a question for you, because this is probably something that you do more, maybe more than me, or in a different way than me. But, you know, I was talking about the scaling. So what are the systems? So I will often look at that sort of handoff system. What are the systems and processes, how we do things around here type of approach that allows the agency owner to also communicate that to the client. I think that's something else that's often missing is in that closing process is the clear communication to the client. And I think sometimes it's because we feel like, oh, well, the client's going to dictate. They're the one who's spending the money, so they're going to dictate how we do things. And I was like, no, They're looking for guidance. So Ms. or Mr. Client, here's what's going to happen. Today we're doing this. Next week, we're going to introduce you to this person. The week after that, we're going to be doing this. It's all document or however you want to structure it. But yeah, telling the client how they're going to be managed.
Yes, I totally agree. I think in this role, especially account managers, we tend to be a little people pleasers, right? We want to make sure that
Yes.
the clients are happy. Although that is a fault, that is something that gets in our way sometimes.
Yeah.
But you do need to set expectations with the client and guide them. It doesn't have to be forceful, but you have to guide them and show them, you hired us because we're the experts.
Yeah.
Here's how we do it. We know this is going to work, and this is going to allow us to be the most efficient working in your account.
Yeah.
And positioning it like we're the experts and we know what we're doing
Yeah.
allows the client to trust you. And I think that as you refine your process as an agency and you get really confident in your own processes, then you can feel really good about moving clients into your process because you feel confident in it. But if you don't feel confident in that, then it naturally kind of crumbles.
Yeah. And I do think that you got to experiment and feel like, well, does this work? Does this feel right? And then also really commit to it. Like just commit to doing it over and over and over again until everyone does it, until it's just a natural thing to follow that process. And not to say it's rigid. I mean, there's always an opportunity to adapt and to change for the situation. But yeah, follow your own processes.
Totally, totally. So a question that just popped in my head. So obviously you've been working in the agency space for a very long time, and you've seen things change a lot.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you've noticed in the last few years that are just absolutely totally different from what you used to do?
You know, it's interesting. In some ways, not enough. So there's so many things that have changed. And I think now probably what's affecting our business the most right now is AI. And I think that has a huge potential for helping us target our prospects better, for helping us develop our sales pitches better, doing better, quicker research. But, you know, I look at things like, again, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, I have been around long enough to see a lot of these phases. So, you know, there's AI, and before that, there was just like the introduction of the internet. And I think what happens is you have these things, these momentous changes, and smart people decide that they're going to be the experts. Right now, you're seeing a lot of agencies popping up or experts popping up. We are the AI experts. But I also think that what you're going to see over the next 1 to 5 years is that just like digital marketing, it gets integrated into the agency itself. So are there things that are totally different that we have to figure out how to work with? Absolutely. But what amazes me is that still some of the basics, sometimes the basics are also what get really neglected. So smart positioning, being clear on who your client is, having a set of an outward messaging strategy that is client focused. That's about what they need and less about what you are. It's what they need and how you can fulfill that need. Consistency, confidence, the right balance between marketing and sales. So it's probably, I don't know, maybe a boring and disappointing answer, but business development is still really relies on having the basics down. And in the end, that's a lot of what I help my clients go back to.
I agree. I think the world that we live in right now, especially in the agency world, it's just a bunch of gurus that are teaching you how to like grow and scale these agencies. But the ones that really stand out are the ones who really know what they're doing and they're confident in what they're doing. And it shows in and how they're targeting their target market.
Yeah. So I think one of the things, I don't know if there's a trend, but I think what we're seeing or what I'm seeing today is a little more cooperation amongst agencies. So it's whether that is agencies partnering with each other to pitch a client, or whether it's about, you know, peer-to-peer networks. I've seen those really grow. I know you and I have both been on Drew McClellan's podcast. So peer networks like Agency Management Institute, I see more of those popping up on a month-by-month basis. And so I think that sense of we may have gotten to a saturation point where the benefits of partnership are far outweighing the risks of, you know, teaming up with a potential competitor. So I think that's a bit different from what we've ever seen before.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. So Jody, if agencies are listening and they're maybe the agency owner is doing a lot of the sales themselves, but they feel like there's some gaps.
Yeah.
Maybe they need to optimize processes. Maybe they need to just have somebody support them. How do you do that? And how could agencies reach out to you for support?
Yeah. Well, mostly my services are delivered in the form of coaching and advisory services and some training as well. Well, first of all, they can always email me at jody@thesuttercompany.com, and I'll make sure that you have that. I also offer a complimentary 45-minute exploratory call, so we can spend that time talking about what I do and how I might be able to help them. But, any of your listeners, if they're a small agency that's struggling with business development, they're welcome to use that link just to take advantage of my expertise over the course of 45 minutes. And maybe we can talk through a few ideas. No, absolutely no obligation. I also have a mastermind group that I have been developing over the last year, which could also be interesting for your agency listeners. If they are, again, they both need the guidance of a coach like me, but they also want that sort of vibrancy of a peer-to-peer network. They also want to learn from their fellow agency owners. What are they doing? That's right. That's different. And also potentially use that as a way to find great partnerships. I'll make sure that you have that link as well.
Yay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And that's such a generous offer for somebody to jump on your calendar and get support. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Jody. This was super interesting. I love hearing what's going on within the agency world from your perspective. So I really appreciate your energy and your insights for our listeners.
Taylor, thank you so much. And thanks for what you do. You also offer such a valuable service for these agencies that really want to grow and thrive.
Totally. All right. Thanks, Jody.
Thank you.
Cheers to happy clients.